Corinth, Part 1. The passer who came 30 years ago from the Rue Saint-Denis to the Rue de la Chanvrerie saw it gradually narrow away before him, as if he had entered an elongated funnel. At the end of the street, which was very short, he found the passage barred on the market side, and he had thought himself in a cul-de-sac if he had not perceived on the right and on the left two black openings by which he could escape. These were the Rue Mondétour, which communicated on the one side with the Rue de Prêcheur, on the other with the Rue de Seine and Petite Truanderie. At the end of this sort of cul-de-sac, at the corner of the opening on the right, might be seen a house lower than the rest, and forming a kind of cape on the street. In this house, only 2 stories high, had been festively installed for 300 years an illustrious wine shop. In the times of Matherin Régnier, this wine shop was called the Pot Heureuse, and as rebuses were in fashion, it had for a sign a post, painted a rose colour. In the last century, the worthy Notoir, having got tipsy several times in this wine shop, at the same table where Régnier had got drunk, out of gratitude painted a bunch of Corinth grapes upon the rose-coloured post. The landlord from joy changed his sign, and had gilded beneath the bunch these words, "The grape of Corinth." Hence the name Corinth. Corinth gradually dethroned the Pot aux Roses. The last landlord of the dynasty, Father Hucheloup, not even knowing the tradition, had the post painted blue. A basement room, in which was the counter, a room on the first floor in which was a billiard table, a spiral wooden staircase piercing the ceiling, wine on the tables, smoke on the walls, candles in broad day, such was the wine shop. A stairway with a trapdoor in the basement room led to the cellar. On the second floor were the rooms of the Hucheloup. You ascended by a stairway, which was rather a ladder than a stairway, the only entrance to which was by a back door in the large room on the first floor. In the attic were 2 garret rooms with dormer windows, nests for servants. The kitchen divided the ground floor with the counting room. Hucheloup had always an ill-humoured face, seemed to wish to intimidate his customers, grumbled at people who came to his house, and appeared more disposed to pick a quarrel with them than to serve them their soup. And still they were always welcome. His wife was Mother Hucheloup, a bearded creature and very ugly. Toward 1830, Father Hucheloup died. His widow, scarcely consolable, continued the wine shop, but the cuisine degenerated and became execrable. The wine, which had always been bad, became frightful. Courfeyrac and his friends continued to go to Corinth, however, from pity, said Bousset. The room on the first floor, in which was the restaurant, was a long and wide room, encumbered with stools, crickets, chairs, benches and tables, and a rickety old billiard table. It was reached by the spiral staircase, which terminated at the corner of the room in a square hole like the hatchway of a ship. 2 servants, called Chaudet and Fricassee, and for whom nobody had ever known any other names, helped Mother Hucheloup to put upon the tables the pitchers of blue wine and the various broths which were served to the hungry in earthen dishes. Before entering the restaurant room, you might read upon the door this line written in chalk by Courfeyrac: "Régale si tu peux, et mange si tu l'oses." Part 2. Laigle de Mieux, we know, lived more with Joly than elsewhere. He had a lodging as the bird has a branch. The 2 friends lived together, ate together, slept together. On the morning of the 5th of June, they went to breakfast at Corinth. They went up to the first floor. Chaudet and Fricassee received them. "Oysters, cheese, and ham," said Laigle, and they sat down at a table. The wine shop was empty. They 2 only were there. Fricassee, recognizing Joly and Laigle, put a bottle of wine on the table. As they were at their first oysters, a head appeared at the hatchway of the stairs, and a voice said, "I was passing. I smelled in the street a delicious odour of brie cheese. I have come in." It was Grantaire. Grantaire took a stool and sat down at a table. Fricassee, seeing Grantaire, put 2 more bottles of wine on the table. That made 3. The others had begun by eating. Grantaire began by drinking. He was entering on his second bottle when a new actor emerged from the square hole of the stairway. It was a boy of less than 10 years, ragged, very small, yellow, a mug of a face, a keen eye, monstrous long hair, wet to the skin, a complacent look. The child, choosing without hesitation among the 3, though he evidently knew none of them, he addressed himself to Laigle de Mieux. "Are you Monsieur Bousset?" asked he. "That is my nickname," answered Laigle. "What do you want of me?"
"This is it. A big light-complexioned fellow on the boulevard said to me, 'Do you know Mother Hucheloup?' I said, 'Yes, Rue Chanvrerie, the widow of the old man.' He said to me, 'Go there. You will find Monsieur Bousset there, and you will say to him, from me, A-B-say.' It's a joke that somebody's playing on you, isn't it? He gave me 10 sous."
Joly, Lend me 10 sous, said Legge, and turning toward Grantaire. Grantaire, lend me 10 sous. This made 20 sous, which Legge gave the child.
Thank you, monsieur,
Said the little fellow. What is your name? Asked Legge.
Navet, Gavroche's friend.
Stop with us, said Legge. Breakfast with us, said Grantaire. The child answered,
I can't. I'm with the procession. I'm the one to cry down with Polignac.
and giving his foot a long scrape behind him, which is the most respectful of all possible bows, he went away. Meanwhile, Legge was meditating. He said in an undertone, A-B-C. That is to say, Lamarck's funeral. The big light-complexioned man, observed Grantaire, is Enjolras, who sent to notify you. Grantaire, melancholy, was drinking. Enjolras despises me, murmured he. Enjolras said, Joly is sick, Grantaire is drunk. It was to Bousset he sent Navet. If he had come for me, I would have followed him, so much the worse for Enjolras. I won't go to his funeral. This resolution taken, Bousset, Joly, and Grantaire did not stir from the wine shop. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the table on which they were leaning was covered with empty bottles. 2 candles were burning, one in a perfectly green copper candlestick, the other in the neck of a cracked decanter. Grantaire was extravagantly gay, and Bousset and Joly kept pace with him. They touched glasses. Grantaire rested his left wrist upon his knee with dignity, his arms akimbo and his cravat untied, bestriding a stool, his full glass in his right hand. He threw out to the fat servant Chaudet these solemn words: "Let the palace doors be opened. Let everybody belong to the Académie Française and have the right of embracing Madame Hucheloup. Let us drink." And turning toward Mother Hucheloup, he added, "Antique woman, consecrated by use, approach that I may gaze upon thee." And Joly, who had a bad cold, exclaimed, "Chardin fricassee, don't give Grantaire any more to drink. He spends his money foolishly. He's already devoured since the morning in the supreme locality 2 francs 35 centimes." Bousset, very drunk, had preserved his calmness. He sat in the open window, wetting his back with the falling rain, and gazed at his 2 friends. Suddenly he heard a tumult behind him, hurried steps and cries. "To arms!" He turned and saw in the Rue Saint-Denis, at the end of the Rue de la Chanvrerie, Enjolras passing, carbine in hand, and Gavroche with his pistol, Foy with his sabre, Courfeyrac with his sword, Jean Prouvaire with his musketoon, Combeferre with his musket, Bahorel with his musket, and all the armed and stormy gathering which followed them. The Rue de la Chanvrerie was hardly as long as the range of a carbine. Bousset improvised a speaking trumpet with his hands and shouted, "Courfeyrac! Courfeyrac, ahoy!" Courfeyrac heard the call, perceived Bousset, and came a few steps into the Rue de la Chanvrerie, crying, "What do you want?" which was met on the way by a "Where are you going?" "To make a barricade," answered Courfeyrac. "Well, here! This is a good place, make it here." "That is true, Eagle," said Courfeyrac. And at a sign from Courfeyrac, the band rushed into the Rue de la Chanvrerie. Part 3. The place was indeed admirably chosen. The entrance of the street wide, with further end contracted and like a cul-de-sac. Corinth throttling it, Rue Molitor easy to bar at the right and left, no attack possible except the Rue Saint-Denis, that is from the front, without cover. Bousset tipsy had the coup d'oeil of Hannibal fasting. At the irruption of the mob, dismay seized the whole street. Not a passer had gone into an eclipse. In a flash, at the end, on the right, on the left, shops, stalls, alley gates, windows, blinds, dormer windows, shutters of every size were closed from the ground to the roofs. One frightened old woman had fixed a mattress before her window on 2 clothes poles, as a shield against the musketry. The wine shop was the only house which remained open, and that for a good reason, because the band had rushed into it. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" sighed Mother Hucheloup. Meanwhile, in a few minutes, 20 iron bars had been wrested from the grated front of the wine shop, 20 yards of pavement had been torn up, Gavroche and Bahorel had seized on its passage and tipped over the dray of a lime merchant named Anceau. This dray contained 3 barrels full of lime, which they had placed under the piles of paving stones. Enjolras had opened the trap door of the cellar, and all the widow Hucheloup's empty casks had gone to flank the lime barrels. Foy, with his fingers accustomed to colouring the delicate folds of fans, had buttressed the barrels and the dray with 2 massive heaps of stones. Stones improvised like the rest, and obtained nobody knows where. Some shoring timbers had been pulled down from the front of a neighbouring house, and laid upon the casks. When Bousset and Courfeyrac turned around, half the street was already barred by a rampart higher than a man. There is nothing like the popular hand to build whatever can be built by demolishing. An omnibus with 2 white horses passed at the end of the street. Bousset sprang over the pavement, ran, stopped the driver, made the passengers get down, gave his hand to the ladies, dismissed the conductor, and came back with the vehicle, leading the horses by the bridle. "An omnibus," said he, "doesn't pass by Corinth. Non licet omnibus adire Corinthum." A moment later, the horses were unhitched and going off at will through the Rue Montour, and the omnibus, lying on its side, completed the barring of the street. Mother Hucheloup, completely upset, had taken refuge in the first story. Her eyes were wandering, and she looked without seeing, crying in a whisper. Her cries were dismayed and dared not come out of her throat. "It is the end of the world," she murmured. Joly deposited a kiss upon Mother Hucheloup's coarse, red, and wrinkled neck, and said to Grantaire, "My dear fellow, I have always considered a woman's neck an infinitely delicate thing." But Grantaire was attaining the highest regions of dithyramb. Chaudet, having come up to the first floor, Grantaire seized her by the waist and pulled her toward the window with long bursts of laughter. "Chaudet is ugly!" cried he. "Chaudet is the dream of ugliness. Chaudet is a chimera. Listen to the secret of her birth. A Gothic Pygmalion, who was making cathedral waterspouts, fell in love with one of them one fine morning, the most horrible of all. He implored love to animate her, and that made Chaudet. Behold her, citizens. Her hair is the color of chromated lead, like that of Titian's mistress. And she is a good girl. I warrant you that she will fight well. Every good girl contains a hero. Chaudet, embrace me. You are voluptuous and timid. You have cheeks which call for the kiss of a sister, and lips which demand the kiss of a lover." "Be still, wine cask," said Courfeyrac. Grantaire answered, "I am Capital, the master of floral games." Enjolras, who was standing on the crest of the barricade, musket in hand, raised his fine austere face. Enjolras, we know, had something of the Spartan and of the Puritan. He would have died at Thermopylae with Leonidas, and would have burned Drogheda with Cromwell. "Grantaire," cried he, "go sleep yourself sober away from here. This is the place for intoxication and not for drunkenness. Do not dishonor the barricade." This angry speech produced upon Grantaire a singular effect. One would have said that he received a glass of cold water in his face. He appeared suddenly sobered. He sat down, leaned upon a table near the window, looked at Enjolras with an inexpressible gentleness, and said to him, "Let me sleep here." "Go sleep elsewhere." But Grantaire, keeping his tender and troubled eyes fixed upon him, answered, "Let me sleep here until I die here." Enjolras regarded him with a disdainful eye. "Grantaire, you are incapable of belief, of thought, of will, of life, and of death." Grantaire stammered out a few more unintelligible words, then his head fell heavily upon the table, and, a common effect of the second stage of inebriety into which Enjolras had rudely and suddenly pushed him, a moment later he was asleep. Part 4. The rain had ceased. Recruits had arrived. Some working men had brought under their blouses a keg of powder, a hamper containing bottles of vitriol, 2 or 3 carnival torches, and a basket full of lamps, relics of the king's fete, which fete was quite recent, having taken place the 1st of May. They broke the only lamp in the Rue de la Chanvrerie, the lamp opposite the Rue Saint-Denis, and all the lamps in the surrounding streets, Montour, du Cygne, des Prêcheurs, and de la Grande de la Petite Truanderie. Enjolras, Combeferre, and Courfeyrac directed everything. 2 barricades were now building at the same time, both resting on the house of Corinth and making a right angle. The larger one closed the Rue de la Chanvrerie, the other closed the Rue Montour in the direction of the Rue du Cygne. This last barricade, very narrow, was constructed only of casks and paving stones. There were about 50 labourers there, with some 30 armed with muskets, for on their way they had effected a wholesale loan from an armourer's shop. Nothing could be more fantastic and more motley than this band. One had a short jacket, a cavalry sabre, and 2 horse pistols. Another was in shirt sleeves, with a round hat, and a powder horn hung at his side. A third had a breastplate of 9 sheets of brown paper, and was armed with saddler's awl. There was one of them who cried, "Let us exterminate to the last man, and die in the point of our bayonets." This man had no bayonet. Another displayed over his coat a crossbelt and cartridge box of the National Guard, with the box cover adorned with this inscription in red cloth, "Public Order." Many muskets, bearing the numbers of their legions, few hats, no cravats, many bare arms, some pikes. Add to this all ages, all faces, small, pale young men, bronzed dwarfmen. All were hurrying, and while helping each other, they talked about the possible chances that they would have help by 3 o'clock in the morning, that they were sure of one regiment, that Paris would rise. terrible subjects with which was mingled a sort of cordial joviality. One would have said they were brothers. They did not know each other's names. Great perils have this beauty, that they bring to light the fraternity of strangers. A fire had been kindled in the kitchen, and they were melting pitchers, dishes, forks, all the pewterware of the wine shop into bullets. They drank through it all. Percussion caps and buckshot rolled pell-mell upon the tables with glasses of wine. In the billiard room, Mother Hucheloup, Chaudet, and Fricassee, variously modified by terror, one being stupefied, another breathless, the third alert, were tearing up old linen and making lint. 3 insurgents assisted them, the 3 long-haired, bearded, and mustachioed wags who tore up the cloth with the fingers of linen drapers and who made them tremble. The man of tall stature, whom Courfeyrac, Combeferre, and Enjolras had noticed at the moment he joined the company at the corner of the Rue de Billette, was working on the little barricade and making himself useful there. Gavroche worked on the large one. As for the young man who had waited for Courfeyrac at his house and had asked him for Monsieur Marius, he had disappeared very nearly the moment the omnibus was overturned. Gavroche, completely carried away and radiant, had charged himself with making all ready. He went, came, mounted, descended, remounted, bustled, sparkled. He seemed to be there for the encouragement of all. Had he a spur? Yes. Certainly his misery. Had he wings? Yes, certainly his joy. Gavroche was a whirlwind. They saw him incessantly. They heard him constantly. He filled the air, being everywhere at once. He was a kind of stimulating ubiquity. No stop possible with him. The enormous barricade felt him on its back. He vexed the loungers, he excited the idle, he reanimated the weary. He provoked the thoughtful, kept some in cheerfulness, others in breath, others in anger, all in motion. Piqued a student, was biting to a working man. He took position, stopped, started on, flitted above the tumult and the effort, leapt from these to those, murmured, hummed, and stirred up the whole train, the flyer and the revolutionary coach. Still, he was furious at his pistol without a hammer. He went from one to another, demanding, "A musket! I want a musket! Why don't you give me a musket?" "A musket for you?" said Combeferre. "Well," replied Gavroche, "why not? I had one in 1830, in the dispute with Charles X." Enjolras shrugged his shoulders. "When there are enough for the men, we will give them to the children." Gavroche turned fiercely and answered him. "If you're killed before me, I'll take yours." "Gamin," said Enjolras. "Smooth face," said Gavroche. A stray dandy who was lounging at the end of the street made a diversion. Gavroche cried to him, "Come with us, young man. Well, this poor old country, you won't do anything for her then?" The dandy fled. Part 5. The journals of the time which said that the barricade of the Rue de la Chanvrerie, that almost inexpugnable construction, as they call it, attained the level of a second story, were mistaken. The fact is that it did not exceed an average height of 6 or 7 feet. It was built in such a manner that the combatants could, at will, either disappear behind the wall, or look over it, or even scale the crest of it by means of a quadruple range of paving stones, superimposed and arranged like steps on the inner side. The front of the barricade on the outside, composed of piles of paving stones and of barrels bound together by timbers and boards, which were interlocked in the wheels of the Anseau cart, and overturned omnibus, had a bristling and inextricable aspect. An opening sufficient for a man to pass through had been left between the wall of the houses and the extremity of the barricade furthest from the wine shop, so that a sortie was possible. The pole of the omnibus was turned directly up and held with ropes, and a red flag fixed to this pole floated over the barricade. The little Montour barricade, hidden behind the wine shop, was not visible. The 2 barricades united formed a staunch redoubt. Enjolras and Courfeyrac had not thought it proper to barricade the end of the Rue Montour, which opens a passage to the markets through the Rue des Prêcheurs, wishing doubtless to preserve a possible communication with the outside, and having little dread of being attacked from the dangerous and difficult Allée des Prêcheurs. The 2 barricades finished, and the flag run up, a table was dragged out of the wine shop, and Courfeyrac mounted upon the table. Enjolras brought the square box, and Courfeyrac opened it. This box was filled with cartridges. When they saw the cartridges, there was a shudder among the bravest, and a moment of silence. Courfeyrac distributed them with a smile. Each one received 30 cartridges. Many had powder, and set about making others with the balls which they were moulding. As for the keg of powder, it was on a table by itself near the door, and it was reserved. The long roll, which was running all through Paris, was not discontinued, but had got to be only a monotonous sound with melancholy undulations, to which they paid no more attention. They all loaded their muskets and their carbines together, without precipitation, with a solemn gravity. Enjolras placed 3 sentinels outside the barricades, one in the Rue de la Chanvrerie, the second in the Rue de Prêcheur, the third at the corner of La Petite Truanderie. Then, the barricades built, the posts assigned, the muskets loaded, the vedettes placed, alone in these fearful streets, in which there were now no passers, surrounded by these dumb and as it were dead houses, which throbbed with no human emotion, enwrapped by the deepening shadows of the twilight, which was beginning to fall, in the midst of this obscurity and this silence, through which they felt the advance of something inexpressibly tragical and terrifying. Isolated, armed, determined, tranquil, they waited.